Hi, folks. We're looking now at the third of our thinking skills for our external exam or our mock external exam, which is synthesising. So, synthesising is the skill of bringing together a number of different ideas or arguments from a range of sources and forming them into a coherent central argument, or to support a coherent central argument. So it's just an absolutely essential skill for historians. It's something that we do consistently when we look at the developing a hypothesis to a question or to an issue, and then finding evidence that supports or refutes the hypothesis that we present. So when we're synthesising, we're probably looking at a response that is going to be a little bit longer, perhaps, than our comprehension or analysis responses that we've done previously. And it involves you most likely using more source material in the response. So as always, our first step that we need to use or need to do is to consider the purpose of synthesising information. So the purpose of what we're doing. And to do that, we've obviously got to read the question first. So we always read the question before we look at the sources or do anything else. So we've got a clear idea of what specifically we need to do. So in this response, we've got a directive there on our word length. We've got a directive there on the sources that we should be using in that question. So we need to use all three of those sources and no others. And then we have the question itself. And the question is asking, was Nero's murder of Agrippina a pre-planned decision? So whilst this can be a yes or no answer, the context of this question is obviously where you're bringing in a range of evidence to argue the case there. So, this would be something that, for example, a solicitor or a lawyer would do in court to either. All right, so once we've determined the purpose of synthesising, so we've looked at our question and worked out what we've got to do, we then look at the available evidence. So we're looking for things that basically, in this case, would support a position or an argument, and that is whether or not Nero's murder of Agrippina was pre-planned. So did Nero know what he was going to do, or did he simply react to the situation? All right, so in looking at our sources, then we're going to then select the best evidence that allows us to respond to that question. So we're going to survey all of the sources and identify the key pieces, be they a direct quote or a paraphrase of an idea, that we can use in our response. Once we've done that, we then need to arrange that evidence in an order that most effectively argues what we believe the answer to the question is, or the position that we're taking on the question. Remember too that the position that we take should be a hypothesis. It should be a cause and effect statement, and we should have evidence that allows us to argue both parts of that hypothesis. So once we've planned that evidence out, we then write our response and ensure that we successfully argue the hypothesis or the answer to the question that we have. Finally, we need to make sure that we read the question again and then review our answer. And I'd probably suggest that you do that all the way through, that as you finish each section of your paragraph, you quickly look back at the question, look back at your hypothesis, and double check that what you're writing about is actually doing what you're meant to do. Because under exam conditions, sometimes we may actually think we're doing something when we're actually not necessarily answering the set question. So that final step then is a step that is absolutely crucial. So we must, in our planning, create and allow time to review and read over the responses that we write. Okay, so now we've got our sample response here. Now I've kept the paraphrase steps of the process at the top of the page there in red, just so that we can see how we're following this process as we go through. All right. So our topic sentence there uses the word of the question and arrives at a clear opinion or a clear stance on the question. So Nero's murder of Agrippina was a pre-planned decision as he made a number of attempts on her life. So because he doesn't just do it once and then give up, because he keeps trying to do it, that obviously indicates that he's thinking about what he's doing. So then we start into our response. So Nero grew increasingly resentful of her interference and decided to get rid of her. So that is our first argument. All right. So the fact that now that he is an older man, he doesn't want his mother interfering in what he's doing, trying to get him to do what she wants. He's old enough to do what he wants. So sick of being bossed around. So then we say, okay, if that's our argument, we need to support that with evidence. So according to Suetonius in source 1, so here we're signposting the evidence with author and with the source that it comes from. So that means we don't have to, at the end of the sentence, for example, put reference the source. So according to Suetonius in source 1, Nero kicked her out of the palace and then harassed her. So he did this with a view that basically he could sort of intimidate her or frighten her into not interfering with him or interfering with what he was doing much less than what she currently was. However, when this failed to frighten her, Nero, terrified by her violence and threats, determined to kill her. So Nero hears the plots in the background about how she's trying to maneuver him out of power, and so he reacts to that. So this is obviously an idea that I'm presenting that shows that it was pre-planned, that the reason why Nero acts the way he does is because he's afraid of either losing power or actually even being killed by his own mother. Suetonius mentions a second attempt of him sabotaging her ceiling to make it fall in on her before being found out. So I'm choosing there a second attempt to underline the fact that he's doing this more than once, that it's a persistent attempt or belief that Agrippina is a threat to him. Now I start to weave in evidence from other sources. So I've gone to Suetonius a couple of times in source 1, and now I'm going to use Suetonius again here, but from source 3. So now I am starting to bring in other evidence, which is a synthesis of the ideas from the different sources. He then arranged for an attempt on her life on her boat, but she escaped by swimming. And so what I then do is I now use another piece of evidence from source 4 to corroborate that fact. Cassius Dio corroborates Suetonius's description in source 3 of Nero's response to learning of this, the framing of Agrippina's messenger, and the claim of a plot against him. So when I'm bringing in Cassius Dio here, I'm signposting again, I'm showing to the marker that I'm bringing in more evidence that supports the ideas that are presented in the sources. So source 3 says this, source 4 says the same thing, therefore it's more likely a reliable or an accurate assumption or piece of evidence coming from our sources. Finally then, he ordered that his mother be put to death and then sent men to kill her. So source 3 and source 4 then underline that decision by Nero to have his mother killed. So having survived the previous attempt at drowning, he's now just going to have it and do it the dirty way, and actually have her killed by his soldiers. We then finish it off with a summary sentence. Clearly, Nero's murder of his mother was a pre-planned decision that took several attempts to fulfill. So there I'm essentially paraphrasing the topic sentence and reinforcing what it is that I've argued in the process of the response. Okay, so in summary then, folks, when you are synthesizing, writing a synthesis response, you need to be using a range of sources to develop a central argument, to develop a hypothesis that is made in response to the set question. You need to use evidence from a range of sources to support it. You need to bring evidence together, corroborate it, to help deepen your argument. All right. So this is a skill that we've been working on for a long time now, that you've been working on since year 7. And so this is probably a skill that is potentially more familiar to you in your historical writing. All right. Thanks a lot.